We are in our very last segment on the Reason Why series. We've been in Genesis 1 through 3 since the beginning of the year. We will be starting a brand new series with Easter, so come back, obviously, for that. And also, I am wanting us not to be delayed to our Easter egg hunt, so I'm actually going to try and do today's message with a little extra brevity. Don't get used to this, okay? But I want to get a running start and remind us, what we have seen in Genesis 1 through 3. We start by seeing how God created a beautiful, perfect world. He created us with the image of God that made us reflect who He was in this creation so that we could multiply and cover the earth with image bearers and reflectors of who He is. We were given a great purpose. We were given a setting in the Garden of Eden that was blissful, where everything was just as it was supposed to be, and it was very good. We were given a place where our relationships were rich, where we got to have a perfect mate in Adam and Eve, and experience all of the joy that comes with intimacy with God and intimacy with our fellow human. And this was the world God intended. This was the world that God gave us. This is the world that God designed and blessed us with. But then we turn the page and we come into Genesis 3 and we see that the world that was made for us is not the world that we are living in, because we see in Genesis 3 that man fell. There was one command, not to eat of this particular fruit, that we could not resist. And we ate of it. We fell into sin. And into sin, we fell into blame. And now we conclude Genesis 3 with looking at the aftermath of the fall. What is the result of having fallen into sin? And really, Genesis 3 reminds me of a science fiction show on Netflix called Stranger Things. Anybody familiar with Stranger Things? You don't need to know it, but the idea is it's really fun if you're in the kind of millennial age and you like the 80s as retro. But back in the 80s, there was this scientific lab, Hawkins Lab, and they had done research that broke open a parallel universe that was full of nightmares and darkness and horrible monsters. It was our world, except that it was upside down. Everything was wrong in this world, and monsters and evil, terrifying things in your nightmares ran around. And the story of Stranger Things is trying to stop this parallel universe called the upside down from taking over the normal world, right? And it's a fascinating show, and of course it all falls down to a couple kids who are plucky and smart. But the show makes us think that we can stop the upside down. Except that the problem with Stranger Things is that if we read the Bible accurately, the upside down has already come in. That's what Genesis 3 is actually describing. That the good world that we were to protect has been broken and invaded by an upside-down world. Our world that we live in is fallen. And I really must stress that we cannot lose that point, that our world is the upside down. Because if we lose that sight, we lose what it takes to hope for a better world. We become complacent. We become accepting. We treat everything that we are in right now as normal, and the Bible wants us to recognize, no, it is not as it is supposed to be. And as we recognize how broken it is, that must channel us to the only solution. So this last week, the reason why that I want to stress is that we must live by faith in God. Because as we live in an upside-down world, only by living by faith in God will let us see, let us fight, and let us escape the upside-down world that has been created in Genesis 3. So we're going to go through this passage, and we're going to see 3 points. We're going to look at the upside down, see the upside down world. We're going to fight the upside down that is inside of ourselves, and then we're going to look at what it means to escape the upside down. So first, let's take a look at this upside down world. And I don't have to dwell on all of these different things. I just simply have to mention them because we all know them quite well. But because of the fall, because of our loss of Eden, there are 6 consequences that we are all dealing with as a daily reality. The first, and boy, kids, these are 10 points apiece. Write these down. The first consequence of the fall is that we live in a world full of evil. Look again at Genesis 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. That is speaking to the serpent. That is speaking to Satan, this agent of evil. And what we are being told is now this creation, which previously was not for Satan to attack, has become a place where Satan is able to wage war and do his terrible deeds upon. And so evil has infected this world, not just from the agent of Satan, but now from our own hearts. Evil, I don't have to explain it to you. It's everywhere. And it's terrifying. I mean, I think one of the things that's the most shocking thing about evil is there is still more evil that seems to visit this world. Like it's a bottomless pit. I remember when I had my little kids, when the Sandy Hook shooting happened. That became this like whole nother notch of what evil could be. And there have been more of those since then. We live in a world ravaged by evil. As Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, that the course of this world is following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Because of the fall, we live in a world ravaged by the designs and the wickedness of evil. The second thing that we see in this world is suffering. God blessed us and said, be fruitful and multiply. But then he speaks to Eve and he says, now I will multiply your pain in childbearing. This is the first mention of the word pain in creation. We went from a world of pleasure to a world that is now painful. And God speaks particularly of the pain of giving birth, which I have heard is pretty bad. Some liken it to a man cold, right? It can knock you out. I'm not getting any sympathy on that one. No. But that pain is part of life. We are all dealing with pain. The third thing that we see in the fall is that we now live in a world of conflict. The second part of verse 16 says that to the woman, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. We remember that Adam and Eve were originally created to be a perfect fit for one another. But now we're told that this wonderful symbiotic relationship is now being twisted by rivalry and desire and wanting the upper hand between each other. And so we have women and men in rivalrous relationships, women undermining men, men overpowering women. And it's both the best thing in this world and the worst thing in this world, right? Women. Men, it's like we can't not live with each other, but half the time we wish we could, right? Right? Am I the only one? Okay, well, I am in this world, you know. Anyhow, but it's a problem. We were made to love, to cherish, to uphold, and yet our relationships are full of undermining, of teasing, of manipulating. I mean, I remember, this isn't really a memory, this is a bad habit, but it took root early in my wife and I's marriage. And I would, tease. Becky. I'd tease Becky about the dinner. I would tease Becky about maybe the way the house looked. Just teasing. Just teasing. It was lighthearted. It didn't, but it wasn't. Right? Teasing is a thing that we do to lay in something that actually is mean. And Becky didn't miss the mean. She recognized it was belittling. And as she tells me about it, I realize the damage that it does. But we in our marriages and in our relationships are constantly belittling and minimizing. The fourth thing that we see in the fall is cursedness. Verse 19 says, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground." So now this ground that was made to be fertile and yielding to the man is made difficult. In place of satisfying and fulfilling work is now just the desperate chore of staying alive, of keeping things going, of pushing the rock up the hill just a little bit further. But life is filled with this sense of futility, this sense of life is short. Life doesn't add up to much. This now, instead of making something significant, we make our lives distracted by vanity. As Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 19 says, "For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts. For all is vanity." And so underlying all of our best works is this question: what is the point? Right? Death, disease, that's the fifth thing we see. God says, "For you were made out of dust, and to dust you will return." We came into this world. God created this world with life held forth. He gave us the tree of life. He gave us the Garden of Eden. He said, enjoy all of it. And he said, there's one fruit I don't want you to eat. And if you eat that one fruit, you will surely die. And we ate the one fruit. That's the tragedy. We moved from a world promising life to a world ruled by death, simply because we couldn't refuse the one. This is an example of how stupid sin really is. We all think we're clever, but at the heart of it is, what were you thinking? Right? But we live in a world that is haunted by death. We are afraid of death. And we know that one way or another, death is going to catch us. And it's going to rob us of our life. And finally, the sixth consequence is exile. We were created to live with God, to enjoy God walking with us in the cool of the garden. There was intimacy and access and joy in the presence of the Father. But what we are told in verse 24, after this sin and the punishment has come down, God drove out the man. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Literally this driving, like you can imagine, like being pushed forcefully out, expelled. It's like God was overcome with nausea and vomited Adam and Eve from his presence. He couldn't have their fellowship anymore because they now represented not the image of God, but rebellion and hatred of who he is and the rules that he had made. And so we have sinners unable to be in the presence of God. We all, with Adam, live outside the garden. We live in exile. So deep has our exile become that we now live in a world manifestly created, manifestly filled with evidence of God, and yet so far from the garden, so far from a connection with God, we live in a world that is full of doubt, about God's very existence and about God's nature. We have to tell people, yeah, something did not come out of nothing. This world does have a creator. Do you want to know who he is? That's how far we are in exile, that the existence of God is obscure to so many people. So that is seeing the upside down. It is evil, suffering, conflict, cursedness, death, and exile. That is the world of the upside down. This is not what the world was meant to be. The second thing I want us to see is the fight against the upside down in ourselves. When we take a look at what happened when Adam broke the one rule, we have to recognize the individual fight that we must wage against sin. Because this whole set of consequences shows us that the cost of sin is incalculable. The cost of sin is incalculable. But what did Adam and Eve think the cost of eating this fruit was? It was going to be to taste something new, to gain some new knowledge, to discover something more in this world that they thought would bring pleasure. They had no awareness of how tragic the consequences were going to be. Go back to my teasing of my wife. Just a cheap, easy joke, right? It's just me kind of needling. And then you see your kids doing it. You see your kids doing it. And you recognize, I am training them up to sin and to do more. And so sin suddenly, you think it's just this small thing. Oh yeah, well, you know, what's a little joke? It is changing the entire family. It is erupting. It is metastasizing. There are no small sins. There are no sins that do not have consequences. There are no sins that do not have unforeseen costs. It is like a match. You know, how small is a match? And yet a match is enough to burn an entire forest down. And that is what a sin is. It is holding a match in a dry forest. You see, sin is made to look small to us. That is something that we discover as we look at this. The fruit seemed like a small gesture, a small step to take towards being more like God. And we're told, oh, you won't surely die. I mean, obviously the consequences can't be that bad. And so we all are doing this. We are going through the world saying, what's a little pleasure? What's a little fib? What's a little extra to me? You see, these are the lies that we tell ourselves when the reality is there are names for those little pleasures, little fibs, little extra. They're called fornicating. They're called lying. They're called stealing. These are not small things. We cannot put lipstick on these sins and say, aren't they really pretty? That's not how they work. And so I want us to grasp, we must fight sin because every sin has 4 consequences in our lives. 1, every sin you commit defiles God's image in you. You reflect God's image less every time you commit sin. 2nd, every sin defies God's word. 3rd, every sin violates in some way your neighbor. You may be surprised at that, but think about the sin of lust. Lust happens entirely in your mind. How can lust violate my neighbor? you are objectifying someone in your lust. You are creating in your mind the understanding that this person can be an object for my eyes and pleasure. And by definition, you have made that person worthy of less than the respect that they are due. And if you think that that will only live in the moment, no, it will reshape your mind to think less of people and think of certain people as objects for your gratification. Every sin has violations of the preciousness of God in your neighbor. And the final fourth consequence of every sin, no matter how small, is that it forfeits your soul. It forfeits your soul. There is no small consequence. As Paul says in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. There is no sin that does not earn death. So what? We must fight against sin with all that we have, right? We must fight against sin. Jesus, obviously speaking metaphorically, says in Mark 9:43, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. Now, obviously, he's speaking metaphorically because we could cut off every one of our hands and every one of our limbs, and we would still be bumping around sinning one way or another. The point is that we must hate sin so much that we would do anything to avoid it. But we can't completely. We know that in our fight is still many losses. And so sin puts us in need of a Savior. And that's our third point, which is how can we escape the upside down? We live in the upside down. The upside down lives in us. How then can we escape the upside down? The amazing thing is that God gives us one hope, even in the midst of Genesis 3. There is a seventh consequence listed in Genesis 3. Amidst God's punishment, God provides hope to Adam and Eve and to their children. He provides one hope. Look at the verse 15 again. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is a strange statement, but God says that there is going to be this battle between the offspring of the serpent, between the agents of evil and the offspring of the woman. And that at some point there will be a great conflict where this serpent will attack the offspring of the child, bruising its heel. But at the same time, the offspring of the woman will bruise, or more likely, crush the head of the serpent. And so there has been in this punishment, in this curse, a promise of good news. In fact, scholars call this the proto-evangelium, the first good news. Inside of the punishment, God plants a promise that there will be an offspring that will come and fix the upside down. There will be a right side upper. And we follow through the whole Bible this promise. It's the storyline of redemption. When Abraham comes, God promises Abraham, you will have an offspring that will be a blessing to all nations. And then to David, there is a promise that you will have an offspring who will sit on your throne forever. That promised offspring is Jesus, who comes, who is God's Son. And this is the real weight of Palm Sunday. Jesus comes to his people. Jesus comes as the promised offspring to come into the upside down. God came into the upside down to suffer the worst of the upside down. Why? To deliver us from the upside down. Beloved, our one hope, and it is in this passage, is Jesus. Look, he takes the snake's worst bite to crush evil. He suffers the most awful death to give us healing. He is rejected to bring us peace. He bears the thorns to cancel the curse. He dies to bring us life. He becomes exiled, forsaken, crying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why? Why does God's Son say those words? To bring us home. You see, all of the upside down was put on Jesus, so that in Jesus, the upside down could be reversed and made right side up again. And the beginning of the right side up begins by trusting in Jesus. I love how the words in Joy to the World sing that God's grace to save goes as far as the curse is found. And so we are told that in Jesus, 2 Corinthians 5:17, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. He is a right side up one. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Have you placed your hope fully in Jesus, in the promise of the one who crushes the head of the serpent, that you might be set right in God's kingdom again?